Hi, my name is Nathaniel Sawyer. I'm a local activist here in Monterey County. I am privileged and honored to welcome Senator Bill Monning, who has been a senator for the Central Coast since 2012 and re-elected in 2016. Senator Bill Monning, welcome.
Well, thank you so much, Nathaniel. I really appreciate this opportunity and have respected your leadership in the Black Lives Movement and beyond. So this is a great opportunity to take our friendship a little further.
Thank you, Senator. Before we start, I want to share this video of last night's presidential debate. I think it's fair for the audience, for the Black community, for people who didn't get to watch it last night because of work, to see what's driving me to be a Black Lives Matter activist and to help you with your efforts in helping combat systemic racism. So here you go.
Answer is not. You have stated.
Can you hear?
No, you've been talking. You made a statement. I'm asking you.
I would love to end it.
Sir.
I would love to end it.
You know, if you want to switch seats, we can very quickly. We can do that. But I'm
sending the National Guard, it would be over. There'd be no problem.
Okay.
But they don't want to accept the National Guard.
You have repeatedly criticized the vice president for not specifically calling out Antifa and other left-wing extremist groups. But are you willing tonight to condemn white supremacists and militia groups and to say that they need to stand down and not add to the violence in a number of these cities, as we saw in Kenosha and as we've seen in Portland? Are you prepared to specifically do it?
I would say almost everything I see is from the left wing, not from the right wing.
So what are you saying?
I'm willing to do anything. I want to see peace.
Then do it, sir.
Say it. Do it. Say it. You want to call them? What do you want to call them? Give me a name. Give me a
white
name.
Supremacists and white supremacists and
Proud Boys. Stand back and stand by. But I'll tell you what. Somebody's got to do something about Antifa and the left, because this is not a right-wing problem. This is a left. This is a left-wing problem.
White supremacists. Antifa's an idea, not an organization.
Oh, you got it.
Not militia. That's what
It's an idea.
His FBI director said.
Well, then you know what?
No, we're done, sir.
Everybody.
All right, I'm gonna stop that because it's ridiculous how childish President Trump is, and that's our example of a leader right now. My first question is, why has Black Lives Matter become such a big movement now, although racism always has existed?
Well, I think, as we discussed briefly the other day, I think the Black Lives Movement came to the fore because of the sheer number of police killings of predominantly young Black men, but also Black women like Breonna Taylor. I think we reached a tipping point, but it's part of a continuum. And the strength I've drawn from the Black Lives Movement is a new generation of young people that are standing up and saying enough. We know that since 2015, 1,252 reported Black deaths by police. 99% of those killings, over 1,250, there were no charges brought against the police. So police have acted with impunity, and we know the disproportionate number of victims of police violence have been young Black men. I think the reporting, maybe greater reporting by the media, maybe the use of social media that has made people on the West Coast aware of killings on the East Coast and vice versa. We've just been saturated, and it's hit a tipping point. And I've taken great strength and optimism from the breadth of the movement, the diversity of the movement, and the leadership of young people. The tragedy is the many tragedies that have given rise to the Black Lives Movement. We would all like to live in a country where it's not necessary, but we're not there yet. And so we look to the Black Lives Movement. That clip of Trump, it's nothing new. People reacted with shock and condemnation this morning, but it's not like a new side of Trump that we haven't seen before. His entire presidency has been based on division, on racism, on stigmatizing or denouncing different ethnic groups, and from soldiers to Black people to immigrants to women. The guy has no controls, and he's playing to a shrinking base, I would like to think. Yesterday, Nathaniel, on the same day as that debate, the Dallas FBI field office issued a report saying that the biggest threat in their region is white supremacists, the Boogaloo movement, and they fear greater violence between now and the inauguration date in 2021. That's from one FBI regional field office. That concern has been echoed at the national level by the FBI, that the greatest threat to peace and stability in our nation is coming from the far right, from white supremacists, self-identified as white supremacists. Those are the people with the guns. Those are the people that have used the guns on peaceful demonstrators. That is the threat to peace in America and to our very future.
Thank you, Senator Bill. Monning. Brought something very important to the table, in the facts that, you know, Martin Luther King once said, "Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter." And President Trump last night had the opportunity, regardless, it wasn't even a political statement thing. It was just saying, I denounce white supremacy. And I can say, as a person that's seen you in the streets, that has communicated with you back and forth on a periodic of time, and you have been fighting, of course, in legislation and policies. And it's kind of scary as an African-American man to know that someone like you isn't up there as president right now. You know, I'm just saying, like, if we're gonna have an old white man as president, I'm 27 years old, so when I'm saying that with respect. But I'm saying that if we're gonna have someone older and white up there, why not you? I mean, I love Joe Biden, and I really hope he wins, and he better win. People vote, go out and vote. But you know, it's really sad.
Yeah, you're nice to say that, Nathaniel. I think one of the biggest moments in my life was the election of Barack Obama in 2008. That was my first time on the ballot for the state assembly. So I shared ballot space with the first African-American president of the United States. And at the same time, our re-election campaigns in 2016. I've had the honor of meeting Barack Obama. His sister, Maya Soetoro-Ng, served on our international board of an organization I started when I was a professor at MIS called Global Majority. She's committed to nonviolent conflict resolution. And I just learned from her the authenticity of the Obama family, the roots, the origins, the struggles, and the commitment to our nation and to our planet. And the tragedy of the 8 years of Obama's presidency is that many attribute Trump's election to the backlash of white supremacists who could not tolerate leadership from a brilliant, young, Black African-American male leader. So those are some of the dynamics and the contradictions that continue in our nation and on our planet. I will say, before my tenure in elected office, I worked with many nonprofit organizations and was introduced to the prison movement when I was a student at Berkeley in the late 60s, early 70s, and the fight then for human rights in the California prison system, ending the indeterminate sentence, trying to fight against solitary confinement, incarceration, and learning the statistics of, again, the inordinate and disproportionate number of Black men and men of color whose education, their higher education, is in California state prisons, not in colleges and universities. And it was during that time, working in the prison movement, as a law student working in the case of the San Quentin Six that stemmed from the killing of prison activist George Jackson, who had been tried earlier in Salinas in the Monterey County courts as a member of the Soledad brothers. So in Monterey County, we have a history that goes way back based on having the Salinas prison, now 2 Salinas Valley prisons in our county. A lot of those cases that come out of the prison are heard in the Monterey County courts. We had the case of Inez Garcia, a farm worker woman who was assaulted by a farm labor contractor, her boss, who killed him in self-defense and was charged with murder and was acquitted in a trial here in Monterey County. So race and racism have been on trial and used as a defense in trials in Monterey County for decades. But again, we're at a new epic, a turning point with the Black Lives Movement and the coincidence with a racist regime, I'll call it, of the Trump presidency that many fear. You read the pundits today, the fear of his very transparent commitment to lie, cheat, and steal to hold power, telling his base to vote by mail and then go vote in person, telling his thugs to go monitor election sites to suppress voting and to scare people. Our country's got, some dark history and a history of racism that we're just starting to come to grips with. But the stakes have never been higher. So I fear for the future of a fragile democracy, one that's never been perfected, but one that the Black Lives Movement gives us cause for hope and optimism of a healing process of coming to grips and working with young people, particularly, to learn the full history of this nation, the history of bringing people to this country as laborers, enslaved in slave ships. In South Africa, Nelson Mandela, after winning power through peace, through negotiation and elections, initiated the Truth and Reconciliation process with Bishop Desmond Tutu. They did that, the year after winning power. That's never happened in this country. Long overdue.
That's true. That's so true. You mentioned policy change. Activists here on Monterey County Bay have been asking for policies to combat systemic racism and bring equity and equality to our surrounding areas. How do we get there?
So I don't think there's any simple answer, but it's organizing, organize. I had the privilege and honor of working as a volunteer organizer, then as a lawyer with the United Farm Workers Union. And it was through Cesar Chavez with an 8th grade education and Dolores Huerta, a former elementary school teacher, that I learned the art and science of organizing, how somebody with an 8th grade education, a base of workers who were immigrants, many without documentation, most of whom spoke no English, how did they negotiate contracts with agribusiness that owned the land, owned the courts, owned the media, the disparity in power. Cesar Chavez did it with moral leadership, as did Martin Luther King, as did Gandhi, as did Nelson Mandela. The power of moral persuasion is the strongest tool of civil rights and human rights activists. So in response, more direct response to your question, as a legislator, well, before I was in the legislature, I knocked on the doors of legislators for many years in Sacramento and Washington, appealing for votes on specific issues. And to be in that office of elected power, I always prioritize meeting with constituent groups, constituents working for safety around schools for victims of pesticide spray. I would cancel a meeting with a Sacramento lobbyist if I had constituents who arrived in Sacramento and wanted to meet, because I remembered how hard it was to get into those offices and to meet with the actual elected member. We've passed laws in the last several terms. Kevin De Leon, who was the first Latino president of our Senate, carried Senate Bill 54, making it prohibiting law enforcement in the entire state from cooperating with ICE in the deportation, the arrest, detention, and deportation of immigrant workers, with some narrow exceptions if there was a warrant from a court pursuit of a violent felon, but for most working people, protection from local law enforcement cooperating. That was an organizing effort, and it was a statewide organizing effort. It was a national organizing effort. We passed that. Governor Brown signed it. But the power of grassroots advocacy is what politicians respond to. And we've passed other laws more recently. Shirley Weber's been a great champion, a sister from San Diego County who taught ethnic studies at San Diego State and is now in the state assembly. We passed her legislation last year, or now 2 years ago, to change the terms under which police can use lethal force. This represented a qualitative change in the rules of the game of the use of lethal force by law enforcement. It was opposed by law enforcement, and it was a massive human rights organizing effort that passed that law really before the recent rise of the Black Lives Movement. We've also passed this year legislation that if an officer engages in violence, we can now discover any past reports of discrimination or violence. That can't be hidden any longer. So incremental improvements, but all the result of grassroots organizing. And I'll just close with this comment. It's an uphill battle to pass a law, to pass a reform law that can help people, that can help level the playing field. But simple passage of the law is not enough. The follow-up work is to make sure it's enforced, that it's implied. A law in the books is nothing if it's not enforced on the streets, and that's what requires continued vigilance and organizing.
Bill, you're absolutely right. I come from a family that I was the first in my family to graduate high school, and so a lot of people like me, if they don't make it to bachelor's to master's, there's a school to prison pipeline that I still continue to see to this day. Many of my friends are now either in prison or dead. And there's a lot of activists now that are trying to turn politicians lately. I've noticed a big surge in Monterey County of young black and brown women running for different local positions. And I am so proud of that, because I think that that's one step in changing the system that has been such a colonized, assimilated practice. But also,
go ahead.
Also educating people like me. Like when I sit in a classroom, as you know a lot about Middlebury Institute of International Studies as a professor, a former professor, and a constant speaker at our school. There's not a lot of people that look like me when we hit the bachelor's or master's, especially the master's level. So I'm a huge advocate on educating the Black and brown community.
Well, and I applaud your leadership, Nathaniel. I would say the hurdles in education are similar to the hurdles in politics for people of color, for women. In the political arena, the traditional pathway involves people having access to resources, access to economic resources, established in a community, and the stepping stones to political power. I will say the California legislature probably reflects one of the greatest diverse legislatures in the country in terms of the percentage of women, the percentage of African Americans, Latinos, Asian Pacific Islander descendants. We have a very diverse legislature. We have the first South Asian representative, Ash Kalra from San Jose, Filipino, first Filipino elected, Ron Banta from Oakland. So there's rich diversity in the legislature. I would say the challenge at local levels of entry into politics are the challenges of economic disparity and diversity, where for a young woman to run for a political office, if she has a family and has shouldered the burden of childcare, and holding down a job perhaps and a home front. The sacrifice required to run for political office is tremendous. And so we do need, I've always favored public financing of elections. The money in politics is a distorting evil in the political system. And we should have, like some other countries have established, you qualify with a certain number of signatures of support, you become eligible for the same resources to run a campaign. That would be an important reform. It's been fought for, but the forces of big money resist it.
You just throw so much wisdom out there, and we don't have that much time left to really get into nitty gritty. But a lot of young activists, and I'm sure you know this, and John Lewis has said, do a little good trouble, but I am respectful in my good trouble that I do. But I do have to ask about social workers and law enforcement. A lot of people have said defund the police, put social workers in law enforcement, or take some of the money from law enforcement and help build up psychological programs, nonprofits, things like that. I remember some local politicians, and we've discussed about the Department of Juvenile Justice as well, and how you're advocating for changes in that. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Well, just on that last point, we are working with the governor to decommission the Department of Juvenile Justice in terms of the detention centers and to make juvenile justice pathways community-based and education-based. So that is part of one of the big criminal justice reforms we've been working on in California. But as you point out, everything's connected and disconnected. Here in Monterey County, after the police killing of Charles Vaughn Sr., a resident of Seaside, known to the community, beloved in the community, suffered from mental illness, late onset schizophrenia. He was actually a graduate of the Monterey Institute of International Studies, now Middlebury, but the former Monterey Institute of International Studies. He became a middle school teacher and suffered a psychological, a mental breakdown. He was off his medications, and police came to his apartment, pounded on his door. He was delusional, psychotic. He went up onto the roof of the apartment building. He was trying to evade and escape, and they shot him dead. Out of that, we formed, with the NAACP under the leadership of Mel Mason at the time, the Charles Vaughn Sr. Task Force on Police Practices and Mental Health, and we advocated at the county level for the establishment of the first crisis intervention mandatory training, crisis intervention training that would bring to those types of situations skilled behavioral health professionals from social services, not wearing uniforms, not wearing guns, but to actually facilitate in de-escalating a serious situation, to protect the person in distress, to protect the public, and ultimately to protect police officers as well. One measurement we don't have is the incidents that, because of that training, did result in de-escalation and not a lethal outcome. That we know of the lethal cases of excessive use of force, unnecessary use of force. They often result in large lawsuits and recoveries for families, but there's no amount of money that brings back a Breonna Taylor or brings back a George Floyd. But I do want to just underscore the work that has proceeded here in Monterey County. One of the issues is often funding. When budgets get stressed, the first thing to go is the crisis intervention training. We should lock that in and make it mandatory funding. We have tried, Ana Caballero, a colleague of mine in the Senate who represents the Salinas Valley and Merced, had legislation that mandates statewide training of law enforcement in implicit bias reduction and crisis intervention training. So little by little, education is the pathway to so much. Education is the pathway to liberation. That's what George Jackson said. And yet we have impediments and hurdles to equal access to education. And as part of our education, one of the things the Black Lives Movement has brought to the fore, we passed legislation mandating now in CSU, Cal State University campuses, ethnic studies as a graduation requirement, as units that have to be obtained. We all benefit, particularly people that have been the beneficiaries like me of white skin privilege, to learn the true history of this nation in this world in terms of what gives rise to immigrant flows, what gives rise to the mental health impacts of separation of families, whether it's current day immigrants or the trauma of slavery that still lives with us today. We get in touch with ourselves as we learn how to get in touch with each other. It sounds pretty simple, but that's what the fight is all about.
Sure. Two more questions to ask you, and then I want to talk about some amazing project you have going on with Miss. The first question is, do you have any wisdom and love to give after your long tenure as a public servant?
Well, I appreciate the question. My term will end because of term limits at the end of November, November 30th. So the November 3rd elections will elect my successor to the state Senate. For me, it's been a privilege and an honor. I've met so many amazing people throughout my large district, bigger than the state of Connecticut, people doing nonprofit work, teachers, people working with inmates in the criminal justice system, really the unsung heroes. That's been the greatest eye-opener and privilege for me, is to get to know people from Arroyo Grande in San Luis Obispo County to San Jose to Bonnie Doon to Monterey to Seaside to Santa Lucia. We live in an amazing area in terms of its natural beauty and resources. We've been impacted and afflicted by natural disasters, a direct result of climate crisis that we have to link to all of our discussions. And I will remain committed to working to make sure we understand the nexus between the environment and public health, between our climate, our planet, and the human right of the access to clean air and clean water. So I would just express a huge thank you to those who gave me the opportunity to represent and to serve.
Hey, you know, I stand on the backs of people like you, Bill. We really do. I consider you a mentor. You get on to me every now and then, just like every other amazing leader out there. But you also see something in me that, and I really truly appreciate that. Go ahead.
Well, I do see the power of love and wisdom and passion in your work, in how you've positioned yourself and stepped up to face the challenges. And I appreciate your acknowledging that those of us that have been around and care about the future and see bright stars rising like you, we're not doing our job if we don't offer constructive criticism when we think that will help for people to grow, not just you, but you know, we do that with our children, we do it with our grandchildren. It's the space we earn as elders, is the ability to offer advice whether people ask for it or not. But you've been very gracious in being open to inputs, and I think most of my comments to you have been supportive and applauding your leadership. But I will always reserve the right with you and others when I think we can grow together to be honest and direct.
On the future, you mentioned the future. How important is this political season that we're in?
It's, you know, we say it every cycle, the stakes have never been higher. But I have to say, in my lifetime, the stakes have never been higher, because the very future of both our democracy and our planet are at stake, and they're linked. We talk about the climate crisis. the U.S. government and we as the people need to be part of the solution, and that means joining hands with people around the world. And many of the inequalities and injustices are exacerbated when we look at the impacts of the climate crisis. And so a pathway to unifying the human family is through working together and addressing the climate crisis. And I bring that back to these elections. It is critical that the current imposter in the White House be evicted and that we work with a new administration, not that they will be perfect or have all the answers, but will at least be sensitive to listening to the people that put them in office. And it translates down to the local level, the state level. California's been a leader in climate action, but we need to do more, and we need to link it to the issues of inequality, to racism, to sexism. Wherever we go, we find those lingering and ongoing diseases. COVID is invisible. Racism and sexism are not invisible, but they all present public health crises. We can't be healthy as a people till everybody is healthy as a people.
You're right. And I want to quickly say, folks, get out and vote. Now I want to make a quick announcement. Miss will be hosting a Jane Black Human Rights event moderated by our very own Senator Bill Monning on Friday, October 2nd, 2020, 5 to 6 p.m. You can see on my Facebook the link that I've shared. The event will feature Professor Jane Black, who is honoring a Miss Graduate, Elaine Gomez, who is, I believe, became Costa Rican foreign minister and who served on the United Nations Treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. Dr. Charlie Clements, who worked in El Salvador treating civilian victims of the repression during the Civil War, and a former Natividad Hospital resident and first Latino president of the California State Senate. Kevin De Leon, with whom Bill served as the majority leader of the state Senate. Kevin led the SB 54 effort to prohibit California law enforcement agencies from working with ICE. Bill, is there anything that I left out?
No, I just appreciate that shout out. That's this Friday, 5 to 6 p.m. And again, direct people to the link on your Facebook. I think you do have to register, and then it will be a Zoom invitation. And I just hold Charlie and Kevin in such high esteem as I do Jan Black. I haven't had the opportunity to meet her former student, Ms. Gomez, who you identified as now a foreign minister for Costa Rica, a graduate of the Monterey Institute. But I know we need to wrap up. I just want to thank you again, Nathaniel, for your work on so many fronts, and look forward to continued collaboration and friendship. Thank you so much.
Thank you.